Miss Davis, how do you know the defendant?
You mean Joe over there? He's a regular at Bill's too, just about every Friday night.
Are you a friend of the defendant's?
Nope, just know him from hanging out at the bar. Only talked to him one time. It wasn't pretty.
What do you mean, Miss Davis?
We got into an argument one night. I didn't like the way he was talking to my friend, and I stepped in. I think he was kind of being a jerk.
On the night in question, September 24th, did you see the defendant, Mr. Richards, at Bill's bar?
Yeah, he was there. He was hanging around that lady over there. His buddy was hanging out too, and that lady over there was with them.
Did you notice anything unusual, Miss Davis?
Yeah, I saw Richards put something in that girl's drink.
You mean Miss Stanton?
Yeah, that one over there.
Would you please tell us what you saw?
I was sitting right across from them. I had a good view. Those two girls were talking to each other. They had their backs to Richards. I saw him take this little envelope out of his coat pocket and pour something in Miss Stanton's drink.
Could you describe the container this powder was in?
Yeah, it looked like one of those small envelopes you get extra buttons in.
Could you describe the drink that Mr. Richards put the powder into?
Yeah, it was some kind of mixed drink that was a dark color, probably something mixed with Coke. I saw Miss Stanton chug it down after he poured that stuff into it. She never saw him do it.
Could you tell us what happened next?
Miss Stanton and Richards went back to the dance floor. Pretty soon, I saw them come back to the bar. Next thing I saw was him helping her out the door. She didn't look so good.
What did Miss Stanton look like?
She was staggering and wobbling around. He pretty much had to carry her out.
Did you report what you observed to the police?
Yeah, I told them.
Thank you, Miss Davis. No further questions.
You may cross, Mr. Stark.
Mrs. Davis, you were consuming alcoholic beverages that evening at Bill's bar, were you?
Yeah, I had a few beers.
Few, Miss Davis? Exactly how many?
I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 beers. Who was counting?
Miss Davis, you claim you saw Mr. Richards put something in Miss Stanton's drink, but you didn't even warn Miss Stanton or tell anyone else at the time, did you?
No, I didn't say nothing to nobody.
Any reason why?
Didn't think it was none of my business.
But you made it your business when you took it upon yourself to tell police, didn't you?
I guess so.
Miss Davis, you didn't report that you saw Mr. Richards put something in Miss Stanton's drink on September 25th to the police until November 5th. Why wasn't it in any of your business until November 5th, more than a month after you claimed you saw this? Why did it take you so long to report this?
I read in the local paper that Richards was charged with third-degree criminal sexual conduct. The paper said that it was some sort of drug thing. I decided to tell the police what I saw. Better late than never.
Isn't there another reason for you deciding to come forward, Miss Davis?
Well, if you're referring to my DUI, I thought it maybe could have helped my case. You know, I tell the police what I know. Maybe the prosecutor will cut me a break.
You testified on direct that you and my client had words in the past. You really don't like my client, do you?
Well, I wouldn't call him one of my best friends.
Isn't it true then that you claim that you saw my client put something in Miss Stanton's drink on September 25th? Is motivated by your hope to get a reduced sentence on your DUI and by your intense dislike of Mr. Richards?
What I told the police and what I'm telling you now is the truth.
Sure it is, Miss Davis. Nothing further.
Call your next witness, Miss Clark.
The people called Dr. Rebecca Williamson to the stand. Dr. Williamson, please state your name and occupation for the court.
My name is Dr. Rebecca Williamson, and I am a forensic toxicologist at Michigan State Police Laboratory. Although I'm a forensic toxicologist, I also have a strong background in pharmacology. I've been employed with Michigan State Police for 9 years as the director of toxicology.
Dr. Williamson has testified before me several times in the past. I am aware that she has been declared an expert experienced in analyzing GHB in several other courts as well as this one. Mr. Stark, I am prepared to declare her an expert in this trial, but you may cross-examine her on her qualifications if you wish. Should you have an objection to her qualifications as an expert, I will listen to any objections you may have.
I have no objection to Dr. Williamson being declared an expert.
Very well then. This court declares Dr. Williamson to be an expert experienced in analyzing GHB. You may begin, Ms. Clark.
Dr. Williamson, could you please tell us exactly what GHB is?
Certainly. GHB stands for gamma hydroxybutyrate. It is a central nervous system depressant that is not approved for medical use in the United States. And because it's not commercially available, it is often street manufactured. What I mean by that is that it is often made in secret in basement laboratories. This adds to the danger as users are not aware of the potency of the drug or the toxicity of the ingredients.
How is this drug administered to a person?
GHB is most commonly found in a liquid form in small bottles or vials, but it can also be found in a powder form. It has a salty taste, so it's commonly mixed with alcoholic beverages.
What are the effects of GHB on an individual?
The effects of GHB can vary from individual to individual. The effects occur within 15 to 30 minutes and can last anywhere from 3 to 6 hours depending on the dosage ingested. The effects of GHB include loss of consciousness, memory impairment, and confusion, loss of motor control, dizziness, extreme drowsiness, stupor, nausea, and vomiting. It can also cause seizures, visual disturbances, severe respiratory depression, a reduced heart rate, lowered blood pressure, coma, and even death. So to an observer watching somebody suffering the effects of GHB, the victim may appear extremely intoxicated and often requires assistance to ambulate.
What do you mean by memory impairment?
Because GHB is a central nervous system depressant, the victim's central nervous system is suppressed to varying degrees depending on the dosage and whether or not alcohol was ingested, among other factors. The suppression can be displayed as sedation, loss of motor control, and varying degrees of unconsciousness. Although victims experience a decrease in sensation, there is never a complete absence of sensation. And this means that even though a victim is unconscious, a sufficient degree of stimulation can awaken the victim. For example, it's not unusual for a GHB victim to describe awakening at some point during a sexual assault. And if the attacker just stops whatever it is he's doing at that point, the victim will pass back into unconsciousness and may only have limited memory of the brief waking moments.
Doctor, did your lab perform a test on a urine sample and blood sample that the people obtained from Melissa Stanton?
Yes, MSP Lab is one of the few labs in the state capable of performing screening tests for the most commonly encountered drugs used in drug-facilitated sexual assaults. In Ms. Stanton's case, both the blood and urine samples were negative for any type of drug commonly used in drug-facilitated sexual assaults, so these tests were negative for GHB. This doesn't mean, however, that Ms. Stanton was not under the influence of GHB during the sexual assault. Her last known beverage was consumed at approximately 1:15 a.m., and she didn't give the samples at the hospital until around 3 p.m. GHB is eliminated from the urine within 12 hours after ingestion, and in blood it only remains present for 4 to 8 hours. And at the time Ms. Stanton's blood and urine samples were collected 14 hours later, the GHB would no longer be able to be detected.
Dr. Williamson, I would like to provide you with a hypothetical situation based on the facts submitted in this case. In the hypothetical situation, the victim is the same age, height, and weight as Ms. Stanton. The hypothetical victim has consumed 3 to 4 rum and cokes in about a 3-hour period. Assuming these facts, do you have an opinion about what sort of drugs could produce these effects?
Yes, the effects described are consistent with a person who has ingested GHB. In your hypothetical situation, the GHB is ingested when the victim drinks her alcoholic beverage, and the alcohol combined with the GHB could make the effects of the GHB even more pronounced.
Nothing further. Thank you, Doctor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Stark.
Thank you. Dr. Williamson, in an earlier testimony, you described the effects of GHB, and correct me if I'm wrong, to include loss of motor control, sedation, unconsciousness, dizziness, nausea, and vomiting. Aren't those also the effects of a person may suffer when they have ingested a large quantity of alcohol?
Yes.
Nothing further. Thank you, Doctor.
The people may call their next witness.
The people call Officer Jim Kennedy. Officer Kennedy, could you give the court your name and occupation?
My name is Officer Jim Kennedy. I am with the Midland City Police.
How long have you been employed with the City of Midland?
I've been with the Midland City Police for 15 years. I investigate the crimes committed in the City of Midland.
Officer Kennedy, you are the officer who filed the incident report against the defendant, Joe Richards. Can you please tell the court why you requested the charges?
Saturday, September 25th, at approximately 3 p.m., the nurse contacted the MSP regarding an alleged rape that had been reported. I was on duty and assigned to the call. I arrived at the Center for Women's Health at 3:23. The victim, Miss Stanton, was already going through the forensic examination when I arrived. When the exam was done, I interviewed the victim. The victim was upset. She cried intermittently throughout the interview, and her hands shook the entire time. She related to me the same story that she testified to earlier. A CSC kit was prepared by the hospital and turned over to me. Miss Stanton was anxious to leave, so I scheduled an appointment with Saunders for an interview the next day. Miss Saunders appeared and provided with a written statement regarding the events of the night in question. When Miss Stanton left the hospital, I followed her and Miss Saunders back to the apartment to view the scene of this crime. I collected the condom from the trash can and clothing Miss Stanton had been wearing at the time of the incident. All evidence was secured in the police evidence locker.
Was the evidence processed through the lab?
A CSC kit was processed, but the condom and the victim's clothing was not.
Why is that?
I had contacted the defendant that Saturday and asked him to come in to discuss the allegations. He came to the post the next morning at 10:05 a.m. I informed him of the allegations against him. I told him that if he wished to contact an attorney before speaking with me, he could do so. I also told him that he was free to leave at any time. Mr. Richards chose to speak with me and gave me his version of September 24th and 25th. The defendant told me that he and Miss Stanton met at Bill's bar almost by accident. He said that he believed that she ran into him on purpose in order to meet him. The four of them, Miss Stanton, Miss Saunders, Mark Sanchez, and the defendant hung out together. The defendant said that Miss Stanton was coming on to him. He told me that when they danced, there was no question that she wanted him. He wasn't surprised when she asked him to take her home. He said that Miss Stanton had been drinking heavily and appeared to be a little drunk by the end of the evening. He said that on the way home, in his car, Miss Stanton was kissing his neck and running her hand up and down his chest under his shirt. When they got to the apartment, they engaged in consensual sex. He said that he had used a condom and threw it in the trash can before he left. He said they enjoyed the evening, and he thought she had too.
Did the defendant provide you with a written statement?
No, he refused to write it down. All he did was provide me with a verbal statement.
What were the results of the CSC kit and urine samples?
The blood and urine samples were both negative for any substances known as date rape drugs. The victim's blood had a very nominal amount of alcohol present.
Did you interview anyone else in your investigation?
Yes, as I stated earlier, Ms. Saunders provided me with a written statement. Mark Sanchez, the defendant's friend, also spoke with me, but he chose not to write anything down. Mr. Sanchez stated that both the ladies were drinking heavily. He said that Miss Stanton was very interested in the defendant. After Mrs. Saunders left, he said that Miss Stanton continued to drink. She was staggering and slurring her speech. She said that she didn't feel well and wanted to go home. The defendant took her home. Then on October 31st, I received a call from Tracy Davis, who said she had information pertinent to the case. I couldn't meet with Miss Davis until November 5th due to time constraints involving other matters. Miss Davis came into the post and provided me with a written statement. Miss Davis had been at Bill's bar on September 24th and into the morning of the 25th, and had seen the defendant pour something into the drink of Miss Stanton. I also interviewed 12 other patients that were at the bar September 25th and 25th. None of them could be helpful in the furthering investigation. All of them stated that they did not recall seeing any of the four individuals at Bill's bar.
Did you do anything else in your investigation?
Yes. After obtaining the information from Miss Davis, I obtained a search warrant for Mr. Richards' apartment and his automobile. I was looking for any illegal drugs. By this time, a great deal of time had elapsed, and I wasn't surprised that no drugs were found.
Thank you, officer. I have no further questions at this time.
Any cross, Mr. Stark?
Just one question, officer. Did Miss Stanton have any injuries, marks, bruises?
No.
Nothing further.
Any other witnesses for the people?
No, Your Honor. The people rest.
Very well. Mr. Stark, the defense may proceed.
Thank you. The defense calls Mark Sanchez to the stand. Mr. Sanchez, please give your full name and address for the court.
Mark Edward Sanchez, 4411 Westminster Road, Midland, Michigan.
What is your education and where are you employed?
I have an undergraduate degree from Northwood University and my MBA from the University of Michigan. I work for Keating Capital Management Group as an investment broker in the corporate division.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. How do you know Joe Richards?
We grew up together in the same neighborhood. We had a lot of the same classes all the way through high school. Joe is a year older than I am.
Where were you and Mr. Richards on Friday, September 24th? Were you with Mr. Richards on Friday, September 24th?
Yes, I was. Friday nights, Joe and I hang out at Bill's bar. That Friday, we got there around 9 o'clock in the evening.
What did you do that evening?
We had been there about an hour or so when Miss Stanton over there walked right into Joe. Looked to me like she did it on purpose. Turned out that she worked at the same place Joe does. She had a friend with her, and the four of us hung out together. We were dancing a lot, and Miss Stanton was obviously hot for Joe. I saw her on the dance floor rubbing her hands over his chest. She kept grinding into him. It didn't matter whether the songs were fast or slow. She was never more than 6 inches away from him.
Were you drinking alcohol that evening?
Just a couple beers, but the ladies had quite a few. Joe and I took turns buying, and I know I spent over $40 on drinks.
Were any of the four of you under the influence of alcohol?
I didn't even have a buzz. Joe seemed fine. He probably only had a couple beers too, but the ladies were getting a little silly.
How long were you there?
Until about 2 a.m. Around 1 a.m., Miss Saunders went to go home. Miss Stanton didn't want to leave, so Miss Saunders left without her. Miss Stanton kept drinking rum and cokes after Miss Saunders left, and by 1:30 a.m., she was smashed. Joe had to help her off the dance floor. I asked her if she was all right. She said she had a bit too much to drink, but she'd be fine. I did hear her ask Joe to take her home. The more she drank, the more she wanted Joe. Joe said he was taking her home. They left, and that was the last I saw of her.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Nothing further.
Your witness, Miss Clark?
Mr. Sanchez, you and the defendant have been good friends for almost 30 years. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You would do whatever you could to help your friend out if he asked you to, wouldn't you?
I wouldn't lie for him in court if that's what you're getting at.
But you did discuss your testimony with him, did you not?
No. Joe called me the following Sunday and told me that he had just spoken with a police officer. He said that Miss Stanton was accusing him of rape. He asked me if I would be willing to talk to the police. Of course, I didn't have a problem with that. I have not discussed this issue with Joe since that time. I met with Mr. Stark once, but Joe wasn't there.
Mr. Sanchez, you testified on direct that the ladies were getting a little silly. What do you mean by that?
Just laughing and giggling a lot. They became increasingly flirtatious.
Then you're saying that all of a sudden Miss Stanton began staggering, correct?
Not until after Miss Saunders left. Miss Stanton had at least one drink that she drank straight down. Shortly after that, she appeared intoxicated.
Appeared intoxicated. You don't know exactly what was causing Miss Stanton to stagger, do you?
With all due respect, Miss Clark, Miss Stanton had at least 6 or 7 rum and cokes before that. The last one must have just pushed her over the edge.
Weren't you concerned that Miss Stanton was so highly intoxicated?
No, Joe mentioned that they might get something to eat, so I figured she'd sober up.
Mr. Sanchez, you're not an expert on the effects of alcohol or drugs, are you?
No.
Then you aren't able to make a conclusion as to what was causing Miss Stanton to stagger. Isn't it possible that Miss Stanton was under the influence of something other than alcohol at that point?
Yes, I suppose it's possible.
Nothing further.
Are there any more defense witnesses, Mr. Stark?
No, Your Honor. Defense rests.
Mr. Stark, are you prepared to present your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have now reached the conclusion of the presentation of my evidence. Very soon, the case will be submitted to you for your final decision. This is my opportunity to summarize the evidence you've heard, or better yet, the lack of theory, and the most importantly, to illuminate for you the weaknesses of the people's case. The people allege that my client, Joe Richards, a clean-cut, college-educated, hard-working young man, drugged Miss Stanton in order that he might engage in sexual intercourse with her. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most preposterous. In order to make your decision, you must evaluate the credibility of the witness that took the stand beginning of the victim. Once you review, you will see that the victim, along with the other witnesses for the people, is completely lacking credibility. Melissa Stanton wasn't interested in dating my client and did everything she could to lure him in. He gave in and slept with her. Then, after thinking of it, decided he wasn't ready to jeopardize his career by engaging in a relationship with someone he'd worked with. When he expressed this to Melissa, she became angry. She probably worried that it would get around the office. She had slept with Mr. Richard and he had dropped her. She wanted a little revenge, so she made up the story she had been raped to cover up her own mistake. Take a look at Miss Stanton's testimony. She admitted to noticing my client work. She frankly, to a single female, my client would be quite desirable. He's handsome, well-educated, personable, and a career headed for the top. Miss Stanton denies that she ever made an effort to find out Mr. Richards' personal life, but somehow she knew that Mr. Richards was single. Miss Richards' secretary told him that Melissa Stanton had asked about him. Miss Stanton's best friend, Stacy Saunders, testifies on cross that Miss Stanton had found at work that my client was available. Miss Saunders also said that Miss Stanton had asked before September 24th if Stacy knew what bars my client frequented. Once they arrived at the bar, Miss Saunders testified that Miss Stanton picked out Mr. Richards immediately. Mr. Richards saw her making a beeline straight for him. Mark Sanchez testified that it was obvious. Miss Stanton ran into Mr. Richards on purpose. Now that she had his attention, she wasn't about to lose him. You heard the description of how Miss Stanton danced with Joe Richards. Although she trivialized about it, both Mark and Joe described her sexy moves. And when Joe suggested that Miss Stanton dance with Mark, she refused, continuing instead to snuggle closer to Joe. Both women were drinking substantial amounts of alcohol. Joe testified that he ordered at least 4 drinks for Miss Stanton, and Mark remembered that he spent at least $40 on drinks. Miss Stanton herself testified on cross-examination that the number of rum and cokes she consumed could be even 6 or even more. Miss Stanton then arranged so that Mr. Richards would take her home. She had the availability of a ride with Miss Saunders, but she wanted to be with my client. She told Miss Saunders to go ahead and she would call her in the morning to let her know what happened. Miss Saunders knew this too. You heard Miss Saunders refer to Joe Richards as Melissa's territory. After a tipsy Miss Stanton got Mr. Richards into her apartment on her couch, things didn't happen quite as she planned. Mr. Richards had second thoughts, and who could blame him? He realized he had used poor judgment. He couldn't afford to damage his career by engaging in a relationship with a coworker. He did his best to explain this to Miss Stanton, and she became very angry, disappointed, ashamed, and probably very embarrassed. Miss Stanton needed to save her face, and she did so by crying rape, putting the blame for her behavior on someone else. Unfortunately for my client, on Mr. Richards. The people who you have believed that Miss Joe Richards drugged Mrs. Stanton with some kind of date rape drug, GHB. Ladies and gentlemen, this is utterly ridiculous. Melissa Stanton wanted to engage in sex with my client. Joe Richards didn't need to drug Mrs. Stanton to ensure that would happen. The people have absolutely no evidence that shows that there was a type of drug in Miss Stanton. The lab expert, Dr. Williamson, testified that there was no trace of GHB in the blood or urine of Miss Stanton. The state police executed a search warrant and came up with nothing. The only so-called evidence that you might have is witness Tracy Davis. Her testimony is far from credible. Here's a person who admits to disliking my client. She waited for over a month before she came over. Then you only came over after she received a charge for DUI in the hopes that she could get a better deal from the prosecuting attorney. She told you that herself. And even if you believe that Miss Stanton thought he saw Mr. Richards put up something in Miss Stanton's drink, you would still have discredited his testimony. It is clear that Miss Davis enjoys his liquor. After reviewing the evidence, it is easy to see that people have not met their burdens of proof. The burden is proof beyond a reasonable doubt when you begin your deliberations. If you have doubt that Mr. Richards placed GHB in Melissa's drink, and if you have doubt that Mr. Richards engaged in sexual intercourse with Miss Stanton's contest, then you must acquit. After listening to the people's witness, you will have doubt. You will acquit. Thank you.
Ms. Clark, are you prepared to present your closing arguments?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at the beginning of this trial, I stood before you and told you this was a trial involving sexual assault, specifically the crime of criminal sexual conduct 3rd degree. I told you that the defendant, Joseph Richards, was guilty of these crimes. I also told you in my opening statement that the people would bring to you the evidence that would prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And, in accordance with my statement, the people have done just that. Crimes of sexual assault are more often than not very different from crimes such as robbery, theft, or the sale of drugs. Just like those other crimes, sexual assault is destructive to society and has an enormous detrimental impact on its victims. There are generally no eyewitnesses because these crimes don't normally involve that type of evidence. Oftentimes, the only evidence of sexual assault is the testimony of the witness, the victim. The perpetrator, the defendant, doesn't commit them in a location where there are neighbors to watch or other eyewitnesses. Because of the embarrassment and the shame, the crimes aren't always reported right away, resulting in the loss of crucial evidence such as semen, hair, or in this case, toxicology results, are often dissipated. Unlike other types of crimes, sexual assault crimes are the only type of crimes where the victim is often the one on trial instead of the defendant. Because of the nature of the sexual act which takes place, persons in the general population have certain prejudices and biases towards victims of these crimes, which makes these cases extremely difficult to prosecute. Defense attorneys often make the most of these prejudices and biases by using them to the defendant's advantage in an effort to focus blame on the victim rather than the criminal actions of the defendant. Mr. Stark has done just that in this case at hand by focusing on and exaggerating the actions of the victim. He is creating a smokescreen in an effort to divert your attention from the criminal behavior of the defendant. Don't let him do this. Let's look closely at this case. First, take a look at the victim, Melissa Stanton. She's 23 years old. Not only has she been steadily employed full-time by the BD&D telephone company for the last 5 years, but she's been going to school at night, furthering her education in an effort to improve herself and her situation in life. She knew the defendant from work, and yes, maybe she was a little impressed with him. Maybe she did find him attractive and made an effort to become acquainted, but that is no defense to the crime of criminal sexual conduct, 3rd degree. On September 24th, Melissa Stanton went to Bill's bar with a friend in order to blow off some steam. Did she choose to go to the bar in the hopes of running into Joe Richards? Maybe. Which one of you can admit to never having gone to a particular place in the hopes of running into a particular someone? Melissa Stanton admitted on the stand that she thought Joe Richards was a good catch. According to Mr. Stark, Joe Richards is the epitome of the upstanding citizen, but most criminals are until they get caught. Perhaps Melissa Stanton did want to get to know Mr. Richards a bit better. Maybe she did run into him with a plan to strike up a conversation, and maybe more. Joe Richards was someone she knew from her place of work, someone who seemed nice, and someone who could be trusted, or could he? Something happened in the early morning hours of September 25th that Melissa Stanton could not have planned. An illegal drug, probably GHB, was put into her drink in order to incapacitate her so that she could be sexually assaulted. Melissa Stanton's right to consent was taken away by Joe Richards. You've heard testimony of Dr. Williamson, the side effects of GHB, nausea, dizziness, memory loss. Each a symptom you've heard used to describe Melissa Stanton's demeanor that night by several witnesses. Let's take a look at those witnesses. Stacy Saunders testified that Melissa Stanton was exhibiting no signs of drunkenness when she left the bar around 1 a.m. By the time Stacy Saunders left, Melissa Stanton had had a few drinks, yet no signs of intoxication. Soon after Miss Saunders' departure, though, Melissa Stanton started acting strangely. You heard Mark Sanchez testify to that. What was it about the last drink that made Melissa Stanton act so strangely? You heard Miss Davis's testimony that she witnessed Mr. Richards put some kind of powder into Miss Stanton's last beverage. Based on that information alone, when Melissa Stanton left the bar that night, she was in no condition to be planning to trap Mr. Richards into a relationship by seducing him in order to have sex, as Mr. Stark would have liked to believe. She doesn't even have much recollection of what occurred once she left the bar that night. Melissa Stanton awoke on the morning of September 25th, naked, alone, and with nothing but a few flashbacks to give her a clue as to what had happened. And all this brings us back to the powder. What was that powder that Miss Davis saw Joe Richards put into Melissa Stanton's drink? Why did it make Melissa Stanton appear drunk almost immediately? Did Mr. Richards intend to take away Miss Stanton's ability to consent and make her his victim later that night? After today's testimony, I believe that you will think so and find Joe Richards guilty of criminal sexual conduct, 3rd degree. Thank you.
Members of the jury, the evidence and arguments in this case are finished, and I will now instruct you on the law. That is, I will explain the law that applies to this case. Remember that you have taken an oath to return a true and just verdict based only on the evidence and many instructions on the law. You must not let sympathy or prejudice influence your decision. As jurors, you must decide what the facts of this case are. This is your job and nobody else's. You must think about all the evidence and then decide what each piece of evidence means and how important you think it is. This includes whether you believe what each of the witnesses said. What you decide about any fact in this case is final. It is my duty to instruct you on the law. You must take the law as I give it to you. If a lawyer says something different about the law, follow what I say. At various times I have already given